A wealthy businessman, en route to the airport, encounters a homeless woman with a baby in the pouring rain and offers her the keys to his home. Upon his return, he is stunned by what he discovers. The rain lashed down on New York City, transforming the lively streets into a mosaic of umbrellas and shimmering puddles. Raindrops exploded against Alexander Grayson's windshield, but he barely registered the storm. His mind was preoccupied with the details of his upcoming business presentation. As the CEO of a major financial firm, his schedule was meticulously planned, leaving little room for emotions, which he reserved for moments outside his corporate life. Yet, something was about to disrupt his routine that day. At a red light, Alexander noticed a figure that stood out from the urban backdrop. A young woman, clutching a baby, was huddled on the sidewalk, trying to shield the child from the rain with her own body. Her coat was soaked, her arms trembling as she held the baby close. Alexander observed her in his rearview mirror, feeling an unfamiliar stir within him. Before continuing, I'd like to ask for your support. Please subscribe to the channel. We're nearing my goal of 1,000 subscribers, and each new member helps us continue to share stories that inspire and touch your day. Thank you for your support. The woman's face caught Alexander's attention. Even from a distance, he could see the exhaustion and determination in her eyes. She held a small, crudely written sign. Please help, we need food and shelter. For a moment, memories of his own difficult childhood surfaced, but he quickly pushed them aside as the light turned green. Just as he was about to drive off, an unexpected wave of empathy overcame him. He rolled down the window and gestured for her to approach. The woman hesitated, but eventually came closer, her baby clutched tightly. The rain intensified, mixing with her silent tears. Without thinking, Alexander opened the car door and said, "Get in." His voice was firm but kind. She hesitated, suspicious, but the need to protect her child outweighed her doubts. She climbed into the back seat, and Alexander adjusted the heater, noticing her shivering despite her efforts to hide it. Their eyes met briefly in the rearview mirror, and Alexander saw the depth of her exhaustion. Yet, there was a quiet dignity about her, a resilience that intrigued him. Instead of heading straight to the airport, he decided to drive to his mansion, a place that rarely saw any warmth or life. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Grace," she replied softly, glancing at her daughter. "And this is Lucy." Alexander nodded, not pressing further. The silence between them was oddly comfortable. Grace, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events, held Lucy close as they approached the mansion. When they arrived, Grace stared in disbelief at the grand, modern home with its sprawling garden. Alexander handed her a silver key and said, "You can stay here until I get back." Grace took the key, her hands trembling, unable to comprehend the kindness she had just been shown. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No need," Alexander replied, avoiding her gaze. "Just take care of her and yourself. I'll be back tomorrow." As he drove away, an uneasy feeling lingered. Grace wasn't just another person in need. Something about her had struck a chord deep within him. Inside the mansion, Grace was enveloped by warmth and luxury. She carried Lucy through the spacious living room, marveling at the elegant furniture and art. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of safety. She found a comfortable room and laid Lucy down on a soft bed, something she had never been able to provide before. As the storm raged outside, Grace allowed herself a moment of peace. The mansion felt like a surreal sanctuary, a place where she could finally rest. She wandered into the kitchen, where she found fresh ingredients and prepared a simple meal. Cooking, a mundane task for most, felt like a small miracle to her. As the scent of food filled the air, Grace smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope she hadn't known in years. For now, this unexpected refuge was enough. In just a few minutes, Grace prepared a simple yet nourishing meal. Sitting at the table, her heart felt lighter, and her tired eyes reflected relief and gratitude. Lucy woke to the aroma of food, and Grace lifted her with a tenderness that went beyond hunger and exhaustion. The child smiled, her eyes sparkling with the innocence of someone untouched by life's struggles. Grace fed her patiently, quietly laughing at Lucy's delighted expression with each bite. For many, this scene might seem ordinary, but for Grace, it was a stolen moment of normalcy. As they ate, Grace allowed herself to relax for the first time in months. Each bite restored strength to her body and soul. The modest meal felt like a feast, a rare moment of peace amid the chaos of her life. After dinner, Grace turned to Lucy, who was now playing with a spoon as if it were a treasure. Grace watched her with a calm gaze, savoring the tranquility. She then explored the house, searching for a place to give Lucy a warm bath, and perhaps take one herself. Entering the master bathroom, Grace froze, stunned by its grandeur. White marble walls, heated floors, and a bathtub large enough for two gleamed under soft lighting. It was a world she never imagined she'd experience, a symbol of a life far removed from her own. But faced with a chance to provide comfort for her daughter, Grace took a deep breath and decided to embrace this luxury, even if just for one night. She filled the tub with warm water and gently undressed Lucy, lowering her into the soothing warmth. The little girl laughed and splashed, her joy echoing through the bathroom, transforming it into a haven of happiness. Grace washed her daughter's tiny fingers and face, then wrapped her in a soft robe she found in the closet. After tending to Lucy, Grace finally stepped into the bath herself. The warm water washed over her, carrying away the weight of countless cold nights and painful memories. Closing her eyes, she was transported back to a time when she had a home and a bright future. But life's unpredictable twists had led her far from that path, teaching her that fate isn't always kind. Grace stepped out of the bath feeling renewed, as if she'd left a part of her pain behind in the water. She wrapped herself in a plush robe, feeling as though she were in a dream. Lucy, now sleepy, rested peacefully on the king-size bed, a sight that filled Grace with relief. She lay beside her daughter, holding her gently, her mind drifting between gratitude and hope. With Lucy nestled in her arms, the exhaustion of recent months washed over Grace in waves. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of clean sheets and the warmth of the room that shielded her from the storm outside. She knew this night was a precious gift, and though she wasn't sure what the next day would bring, she resolved to set aside her fears and anxieties. For the first time in a long while, Grace fell asleep without worry, enveloped in a strange but welcome peace. That night, memories of her past life surfaced in her dreams. She recalled a time when she was young and full of ambition, when nothing seemed impossible. She had been a dedicated student, determined to make a difference and build a future. But those dreams were shattered when she lost her parents in a tragic accident. The grief consumed her, and the financial support that had allowed her to pursue her studies vanished. Grace's struggles deepened when she met Christopher, a man who initially seemed kind and understanding. He became her confidant during her darkest days, offering what she thought was unwavering support. But over time, Christopher revealed his true nature: possessive, manipulative, and cruel. He drained her savings, leaving her penniless and pregnant. When she confronted him, he coldly dismissed her, leaving her to face the world alone. Unable to continue her studies and with no support system, Grace found herself homeless, struggling to provide for Lucy. Each day was a battle, but that night in Alexander's mansion offered a fleeting glimpse of hope. As the first rays of sunlight filtered into the room, Grace slowly awoke, still caught between sleep and reality. The room was quiet, save for Lucy's soft breathing. She looked at her daughter's peaceful face and smiled. That night had been more than just rest. It was a reminder that hope still existed. Grace rose, taking a deep breath, determined to fight for a better future for herself and Lucy. The elegant surroundings reminded her of how far she had fallen, but also the resilience that had carried her this far. Though her past was marked by loss and betrayal, Grace knew she had the strength to rebuild her life, one step at a time. New York City, once the stage for her dreams, had become a battlefield where every day was a fight for survival. As Grace gently touched Lucy's face, her tear-filled eyes reflected both pain and the strength that had carried her this far. Her daughter was her only treasure. For Lucy, Grace endured freezing nights, exhaustion, and constant uncertainty. Every night on the streets, every threat she faced, was a burden she silently bore for her child's sake. Grace never let despair cloud her eyes when she looked at Lucy. She always tried to smile, hiding the tears and the growing fear within. It was her silent promise. Her daughter wouldn't carry the weight of her suffering. Now, in this mansion, safe and warm, a deep sense of gratitude began to rise within her. The memory of all she had endured made Alexander's generosity even more profound. He knew nothing of her story, yet he had extended a hand, not just any hand, but one of hope, a chance to breathe before facing life's challenges again. Grace wondered how she could ever thank him, but found no words. How could she express such immense gratitude? It wasn't just a physical shelter he had offered. It was a reprieve from suffering, a night where she and Lucy could sleep in peace. Grace closed her eyes, searching for a way to repay him. Images of her first night in college, happy days with her parents, and the love she once knew flooded her mind. She decided then and there that she wouldn't let this act of kindness fade away. Alexander had given her something no amount of money could buy, proof that kindness still existed in the world. She was determined to honor that. In that moment, Grace resolved to start over, no matter how difficult it might be. She had already faced the greatest obstacles, and now, with Lucy in her arms and renewed determination in her heart, she knew she had to turn gratitude into action. She understood Alexander might never grasp the depth of her thankfulness, but she promised herself she would do everything possible to show him that his gesture had been more than just help. He had given her a night of peace that restored her strength to keep fighting. Alexander returned to the mansion earlier than expected, as his meeting had been postponed. As he entered, he sensed an unusual warmth in the air. He paused in the hallway, hearing what sounded like soft laughter. To his surprise, he realized it was a baby's laugh. Curious, he followed the sound to the guest room, where the slightly open door revealed a scene he never expected to see in his own home. The room, bathed in afternoon light, was filled with warmth and tranquility. Grace knelt on the floor, playing with Lucy, making a stuffed bear dance from side to side. The little girl giggled each time Grace moved the toy just out of reach. Grace's expression radiated genuine affection and joy, something Alexander recognized as rare in his own life. He stood there for a moment, silently observing, captivated by the simplicity and happiness emanating from the two of them. Grace and Lucy's presence seemed to have transformed the house, filling it with a warmth Alexander had never experienced before. Without realizing it, a gentle smile crossed his face, and he felt something he hadn't known was missing, a sense of coziness and humanity. Suddenly, Grace sensed his presence and turned around, slightly startled and embarrassed. She quickly set the bear down and held Lucy, who was still smiling, unaware of Alexander's presence. For a moment, Grace hesitated, as if afraid of being reprimanded for feeling so at ease. "No need to stop on my account," Alexander said gently, his voice surprisingly soft, almost encouraging. Grace relaxed slightly, but her eyes showed a mix of surprise and gratitude that Alexander couldn't ignore. He realized how much his simple offer of shelter meant to her. There was deep sincerity in her expression, and he could see that the safety and comfort of his home had meant more to her than he'd imagined. I didn't know you'd be back so soon," Grace said, her voice trembling slightly but filled with dignity. Alexander took a few steps closer, looking at Lucy with curiosity. The child gazed at him with innocent eyes, reaching out her tiny hand. She grasped Alexander's finger happily, making him smile in a way he hadn't expected. The simple gesture seemed to hold a sweetness and simplicity that touched him deeply. "She's amazing," Alexander murmured, looking at Grace, who now smiled with pride and emotion. "Yes, she is," Grace replied, her eyes shining with a feeling that went beyond words. Holding Lucy closer, she continued in almost a whisper, "Having a safe night, a roof over our heads after so long, it was like a dream." Alexander felt the weight of Grace's words and realized how much that night had meant to her. Each word made him feel a growing sense of responsibility, something he couldn't ignore. Grace wasn't just a stranger he'd helped. She and Lucy had filled an invisible void in his life. The simple scene, filled with laughter and genuine smiles, brought a new energy to the house and inexplicably to his heart. "Grace," Alexander said, his voice low but sincere, "there's no need to thank me. Actually, I think I needed this as much as you did." Grace looked at him, surprised and moved by his unexpected confession. It was hard for her to imagine that a man like Alexander, so powerful and self-assured, would admit to needing something, let alone her and her daughter. But there, before her, he seemed more human, even vulnerable, as if that admission were a surrender to his own emotions. And suddenly, Grace realized he, too, carried a silent loneliness. "Even so, I'm grateful," she murmured softly, her voice filled with emotion. "This place, this chance, means so much more than I can express. After so many hardships, it's more than I could ever ask for." Holding Lucy close, Grace felt a wave of relief flow through her. Alexander's offer to let her stay as long as she needed was more than she had ever expected. The security of knowing her daughter would have a safe place to sleep was a gift she never imagined receiving. The hardships, the cold and lonely nights, and the weight of so many deprivations now felt less overwhelming, as if simply being under this roof was enough to renew her strength. The depth of Grace's relief stirred something within Alexander. He realized there was a quiet strength and dignity in this woman, a resilience he didn't often see. Watching Grace embrace Lucy with a mix of love and protection, he wondered how someone who had endured so much pain could still radiate such kindness. Before leaving, he leaned down and gently touched Lucy's face. The child, with curious eyes, laughed again, holding his finger as if it were a toy. Alexander felt an unexpected tenderness, and in that small gesture, something shifted. He realized that somehow that touch and that laugh had ignited a spark in his heart, a feeling he couldn't explain but that felt right and complete. Grace watched as Alexander left, feeling a wave of peace wash over her. His generosity wasn't just about shelter. It was a kind of silent acceptance, a lifeline for both of them. Something invisible and powerful seemed to connect them. She didn't know if he felt the same, but this moment of connection would never be forgotten. Victoria Sinclair arrived at the mansion unannounced, her steps confident and her gaze sharp. The driver had dropped her off at the grand entrance, and she expected to find Alexander ready to welcome her, as he usually did before Grace and Lucy entered his life. Victoria was the heir to an empire rivaling Alexander's, and their relationship had always been marked by competition and intense passion. Ambitious, proud, and confident in her importance to Alexander, she didn't bother to announce her arrival, believing he would be pleased to see her. She walked through the main living room, admiring the familiar luxury of the mansion, and soon found Alexander in his study, reviewing documents. He greeted her with restrained surprise, but couldn't hide his slight discomfort. Over the past few months, the distance between them had grown, and Victoria knew something had changed. "Alexander," Victoria said with a confident smile and direct gaze, "I missed you, so I decided to drop by unannounced." Alexander smiled, but his gaze drifted toward the hallway, almost distractedly, and Victoria quickly noticed the subtle shift. She knew Alexander as a man dedicated to his business, practical and guarded in his personal relationships, always careful to keep his private life under control. Yet, there was something new and undefined in his expression, something Victoria couldn't quite decipher. As they spoke, Victoria became aware of a different presence in the mansion. From upstairs, she heard a soft, childlike sound. Frowning, she interrupted the conversation and walked purposefully toward the noise. Alexander hesitated but didn't stop her. Part of him knew Victoria would eventually discover Grace and Lucy, and he no longer felt the need to hide their presence. Turning the corner, Victoria found Grace holding Lucy in her arms. The initial shock on her face quickly turned to distrust and resentment. She looked Grace up and down, scrutinizing every detail, her simple clothes, the protective way she held her daughter. Lucy glanced at the stranger with innocent curiosity, but Grace immediately sensed the hostility in Victoria's gaze. "And who might you be?" Victoria asked, her tone laced with mockery and venom. Grace hesitated but answered calmly and politely, trying to ignore the growing discomfort. "I'm Grace, and this is my daughter, Lucy." Victoria stifled a sarcastic laugh, her eyes narrowing as she examined Grace with disdain. She assumed Alexander must be offering shelter to this woman, and jealousy began to simmer in her chest. It was impossible for Victoria to accept that Alexander could care about someone who, in her eyes, was nothing more than a stranger. After a tense moment, Victoria turned and marched back to the study where Alexander waited. Her expression was now sharp with distrust and jealousy. "So, the young lady I found upstairs," she began, her voice dripping with irony and accusation. "Is she your latest guest?" Alexander remained calm, but couldn't deny the discomfort Victoria's insistence caused. He knew explaining Grace's presence to her would be difficult, and Victoria's assessing look made it clear she assumed the worst. "Grace and her daughter are going through tough times. I offered to help," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. But Victoria was already consumed with jealousy. "Don't you think it's risky, Alexander, letting someone you barely know stay here? She could be trying to take advantage of you," she insinuated, her voice heavy with suggestion. Alexander stayed silent for a moment, but Victoria's words planted a seed of doubt. He knew Grace was honest, but security and appearances had always been crucial in his life, and Victoria's sharp words made him question if he was being impulsive. Seeing the doubt she had planted, Victoria pressed further. "Look at her, Alexander. A stranger with a child. An easy situation to manipulate to get what she wants. How do you know she's trustworthy?" Alexander felt the weight of her words. While part of him resisted doubting Grace, another part couldn't ignore the implications. With a sigh, he went upstairs to the room where Grace was with Lucy. Seeing him enter with a tense expression, Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Something had changed in Alexander's demeanor, and her heart raced as she realized he might be doubting her. "Grace, I need to understand a bit more about your story. Is there something you need to tell me?" he asked, his tone serious. Grace was caught off guard, feeling cornered. His words sounded like judgment, a silent accusation that struck her deeply. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to respond. I've already told you what's important," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to take advantage of anything." Alexander observed her reaction closely. Part of him still resisted believing she could be dishonest, but Victoria's doubt lingered. Grace saw the conflict on his face and, for the first time, felt that this refuge, which meant so much to her and Lucy, might be just a fleeting illusion. Feeling humiliated and desolate, she held Lucy tightly and, without a word, decided she wouldn't stay where she wasn't truly accepted. "I think I understand," she said, her voice firm but hiding deep pain. "Thank you for the help, Alexander, but Lucy and I have stayed long enough." Holding Lucy in her arms, she left the room without looking back. In the days following Grace and Lucy's departure, Alexander felt a constant restlessness. The mansion, once his fortress of tranquility, now felt disturbingly empty. Every corner reminded him of Grace's gentle presence and Lucy's innocent joy. The echoes of their laughter haunted him, and he realized how much their absence had left a void. In his study, as he tried to focus on work, flashes of the moments he shared with Grace came to mind. He remembered Grace and Lucy playing in the room, the lightness of her smile despite her hardships. He remembered Lucy's tiny hand holding his finger and the tenderness with which Grace cradled her daughter. These simple memories now affected him deeply. Grace had filled the space with a humanity he hadn't known he needed. The more he thought about it, the more he questioned his reaction to Victoria's accusation. Doubt and regret began to consume him. The image of Grace's hurt expression, her resigned silence as he confronted her with suspicion, haunted Alexander. He replayed the moment she left the mansion, not even asking for explanations, as if she had accepted that her honesty would never be enough. The pain on her face was a bitter reminder. She hadn't tried to justify herself, and now every word of accusation he'd spoken felt crueler. After days of reflection and growing torment, Alexander made a decision. He needed the truth, not the poison assumptions Victoria had planted. He hired a private investigator to uncover Grace's past. The days of waiting felt endless. Alexander tried to focus on his responsibilities, but memories of Grace and Lucy kept flooding back. He remembered Grace thanking him for letting them stay safely under his roof. He remembered how the house had seemed transformed, warmed by Lucy's laughter and Grace's quiet strength. The sense of loss only grew, and Alexander wondered how he could have doubted her integrity. When he finally received the investigator's report, Alexander opened it quickly, his heart heavy with anguish and the need for redemption. As he read, Grace's story unfolded with a depth he had never imagined. She had been a dedicated student with a promising career until the tragedy of losing her parents. Her path had been marked by pain, abandonment, and an abusive relationship that left her penniless and alone. Despite it all, she had endured with dignity, fighting to protect Lucy amid poverty and despair. Alexander felt devastated. Grace had never been a schemer. She had never wanted anything from him but a temporary shelter, and he had betrayed her by believing Victoria's cold words. Regret hit him like a blow, and he realized he had been selfish and unfair. The pride that had always guided him melted away, leaving behind a bitterness hard to bear. As he continued reading, a painful clarity emerged. Grace's strength and resilience were undeniable, and he knew he had lost something more precious than any material possession. He had lost her trust, and with it, a chance at something real. Victoria had never been, and never would be, the woman Alexander truly needed by his side. Her coldness and manipulative nature, always twisting situations to maintain control, now disgusted him. The love he once thought he felt for her seemed like an illusion, built on appearances and self-interest. Realizing this, he felt an urgent need to find Grace and Lucy, not just to apologize, but to offer them something more. He wanted Grace to know that her kindness had transformed him, that the warmth and sincerity she brought into his life were now indispensable. He was determined to find them. He asked the investigator to locate Grace, knowing he needed the chance to redeem himself. That night, sleep eluded him. His heart raced at the thought that if he didn't act soon, he might lose the opportunity to make things right. In his mind, he revisited every moment they had shared, every smile, every tender gesture Grace had shown toward Lucy. He remembered her words of gratitude, the way she looked at him with respect and appreciation. These memories fueled his determination to fight for her forgiveness. The next day, Alexander received Grace's location. Learning where she was brought a wave of relief, but also a new fear. He didn't know how she would react to seeing him again, or if she would accept his apology. But one thing was clear. He was willing to do whatever it took to show her the sincerity of his regret and his need to have them back in his life. As he drove to the address where Grace was staying, Alexander felt a mix of anxiety and hope. He knew finding her meant more than just correcting a mistake. It was a chance to open the door to a new life, one he had never planned but now realized was what he truly needed. When he arrived, Alexander took a deep breath, facing the weight of the decisions that had led him here. He was prepared to hear her rejection, to accept that she might never want to see him again, but he also knew he couldn't let fear stop him. Grace and Lucy had become the most important part of his life, and he needed to fight for them. He knocked on the door, and within seconds it opened. Grace appeared, her expression a mix of surprise and caution. For a moment, Alexander felt small before her, but with a deep breath he began. "Grace, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, trying to contain the emotion. I know I'm probably the last person you wanted to see, but please give me a chance. I made a terrible mistake. I let doubts and insecurities cloud my judgment, and I was unfair." He paused, watching her face. "Since you and Lucy left, I realize how much you both mean to me. The house, my life, felt empty without you." Grace listened, and Alexander saw an internal struggle in her eyes. She didn't respond immediately, but he felt his words were reaching her. Though she was silent, something in her gaze encouraged him to continue. "Grace, you gave me a new perspective. You showed me what truly matters. I want you to know I'm not just here to apologize. I'm here to ask you to come back home with me. I want to give you and Lucy the home you deserve, a home where you can be happy. I want you to stay, not as guests, but as part of my life, our lives." Grace took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. For so long, she had been searching for a refuge, a place where she could finally feel at peace. Alexander's proposal was tempting, but her heart still bore the scars of abandonment and distrust. She looked away, her gaze falling on Lucy, who was playing near the door. She began to recall everything she had endured to get here. The pain, the lonely nights on the streets, the cold, but also the brief moments of hope. Now, facing Alexander, she felt life was offering her a second chance. His words, so sincere and filled with regret, touched her deeply. She looked at Lucy, realizing this might be the opportunity to give her daughter something she had never had, a true family, a place where love and security could flourish. Turning her gaze back to Alexander, Grace saw honesty in his eyes, and something within her calmed. She knew forgiving him and accepting his invitation was more than an emotional decision. It was a chance at a new life, a fresh start she had never thought possible. Lucy, sensing the emotion in the air, approached Alexander, looking at him with childish curiosity. In a sweet and spontaneous gesture, she reached out her arms to him. "Uncle Alex, are you coming with us?" Lucy asked, her soft voice filled with expectation. Her hopeful gaze made Alexander's heart race. Kneeling down to her level, he opened his arms and hugged her, whispering moved, "Yes, my little one, I'll come with you forever." Seeing Lucy's gesture, Grace felt a knot unravel in her heart. It was as if her daughter's innocence was giving her permission to start again, to open her heart once more. She smiled silently, and when Alexander looked up, he found her gaze full of tenderness and silent understanding. "I accept, Alexander," Grace said, her voice heavy with emotion, "but with one condition, that what we build is real, without fears or distrust." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I promise, Grace. I swear we'll build together, and nothing, no one, will take that away from us." As he embraced her, Alexander felt the certainty that he was starting a new chapter in his life. In that moment, he realized the love and trust growing between them were much stronger than any doubt or fear. When they finally returned to the mansion together, the cold, formal environment seemed transformed. Lucy's laughter filled every corner, and Grace's gaze, now bright and serene, reflected the peace and happiness he had been seeking. Victoria, upon hearing of their reconciliation, felt the bitter reality of her defeat. She hadn't just lost Alexander to another woman. She had lost him to a family he had chosen to build with sincerity and love. Defeated and humiliated, Victoria left, knowing she would never hold the place in his heart she once thought she owned. Over time, Alexander offered Grace a position in his company, where she could dedicate herself and grow professionally, knowing he would support her every step of the way. Together, they gradually built a genuine life, where trust and respect were the foundation. For Lucy, Alexander became more than just a constant presence. He became the father figure she so desperately needed. In his care for the little one, he found the purpose he had been seeking. One sunny day, while they were playing in the garden, Lucy called him Dad for the first time, and Alexander felt it was the greatest title he had ever received. Every day was a step toward a new life, a life where everyone had the chance to be happy, to feel complete and secure. Alexander, Grace, and Lucy finally formed a family they all needed, a family where love and hope blossomed anew each morning. And so, surrounded by the joy and warmth of a life full of purpose and love, Alexander, Grace, and Lucy moved forward together, building a future filled with hope, where the past was just a distant memory and the present a promise they renewed every day. Did you enjoy this heartwarming story full of twists and emotions? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Let us know what you thought of this emotional ending. See you in the next story. Her path had been marked by pain and abandonment, by an abusive relationship in which she had placed her trust. Then came the abandonment, the solitary struggle to protect Mia amid poverty and despair. Every line of the investigation revealed the strength of a woman who, despite all odds, had endured with her dignity intact. Daniel felt devastated. Emily had never been a schemer, had never wanted anything from him but a temporary shelter, and he had betrayed her by believing Victoria's cold words. Regret hit him like a blow, and he realized he had been selfish and unfair. The pride that had always guided him melted away, leaving behind a bitterness hard to bear. He knew that by doubting Emily, he had lost something more precious than any material possession. As he continued reading, a painful clarity emerged. Victoria had never been, and never would be, the woman Daniel truly needed by his side. Her coldness and cruelty in manipulating situations to maintain control and influence disgusted him. The love he thought he felt for Victoria now seemed like an illusion, built on appearances and self-interest. Realizing this, he felt an urgent need to find Emily and Mia, to offer them a sincere apology, but also something more. He wanted Emily to know that her kindness had transformed him, that the warmth and sincerity she had brought into his life were now indispensable to him. He was determined to find them. He asked the investigator to locate Emily, knowing he needed the chance to redeem himself. That night he couldn't sleep, his heart racing at the thought that if he didn't act soon, he might forever lose the chance to make amends with her. In his mind, he revisited every moment they had shared, every smile, every gesture of affection Emily had shown for Mia. He remembered her words of thanks, the way she looked at him with respect and gratitude. These memories drove him to fight for her forgiveness. Finally, the next day, Daniel received Emily's location. Learning where she was brought him a wave of relief, but also a new fear. He didn't know how she would react to seeing him again, and had no idea if she would accept his apology or wish him gone. But one thing was clear. He was willing to do whatever it took for her to understand the sincerity of his regret and his need to have them back in his life. Leaving for the address where Emily was staying, Daniel felt a mix of anxiety and hope in his heart. He knew that finding her meant more than just correcting a mistake. It was a chance to open the door to a new life, one he had never planned but now felt was what he truly needed. Reaching the address, Daniel took a deep breath. Facing the weight of the decisions that had led him here, he was prepared to hear her rejection, to accept that she might never want to see him again, but he also knew he couldn't let fear stop him. He knew that Emily and Mia had become the most important part of his life, and he needed to fight for them. He knocked on the door, and within seconds it opened. Emily appeared, surprised, with visible caution in her gaze. For a moment, Daniel felt small before her, but with a deep sigh he began. "Emily, please," he said, almost in a whisper, trying to contain the emotion in his voice. "I know I'm probably the last person you wanted to see, but please give me a chance. I made a terrible mistake. I let doubts and insecurities cloud my judgment, and I was unfair." He took a deep breath, watching her face. "Since you and Mia left, I realize how much you both mean to me. The house, my life, felt empty without you." Emily listened, and Daniel saw an internal struggle in her eyes. She didn't respond immediately, but he felt his words were reaching her. Though she was silent, something in the way she looked at him encouraged him to continue. "Emily, you gave me a new perspective, showed me what truly matters. I want you to know I'm not just here to apologize. I'm here to ask you to come back home with me. I want to give you and Mia the home you deserve, a home where you can be happy. And I want you to stay, not as guests, but as part of my life, of our lives." Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. For so long, she had been searching for a refuge, a place where she could finally feel at peace. Daniel's proposal was tempting, but her heart still bore the scars of abandonment and distrust. She looked away, her gaze falling on Mia, who was playing near the door, and began to recall everything she'd endured to get here. All the pain, the lonely nights on the streets, the cold, but also the brief moments of hope. And now, facing Daniel, she felt that life was offering her a second chance. His words, so sincere and filled with regret, touched her deeply. She looked at Mia, realizing that maybe this was the opportunity to give her daughter something she'd never had, a true family, a place where love and security could flourish. Turning her gaze back to Daniel, Emily saw honesty in his eyes, and something within her calmed. She knew that forgiving him and accepting his invitation was more than an emotional decision. It was a chance at a new life, a fresh start she had never thought possible. Mia, sensing the emotion in the air, approached Daniel, looking at him with childish curiosity. In a sweet and spontaneous gesture, she reached out her arms to him. "Uncle Dan, are you coming with us?" Mia asked, her soft voice filled with expectation. Her hopeful gaze made Daniel's heart race. Kneeling down to her level, he opened his arms and hugged her, whispering moved, "Yes, my little one, I'll come with you forever." Seeing Mia's gesture, Emily felt a knot unravel in her heart. It was as if her daughter's innocence was giving her permission to start again, to open her heart once more. She smiled silently, and when Daniel looked up, he found her gaze full of tenderness and silent understanding. "I accept, Daniel," Emily said, her voice heavy with emotion, "but with one condition, that what we build is real, without fears or distrust." He nodded, tears discreetly in his eyes. "I promise, Emily. I swear we'll build together, and nothing and no one will take that away from us." As he embraced her, Daniel felt the certainty that he was starting a new chapter in his life. In that moment, he realized the love and trust growing between them were much stronger than any doubt or fear. When they finally returned to the mansion together, the cold, formal environment seemed transformed. Mia's laughter filled every corner, and Emily's gaze, now bright and serene, was a true reflection of the peace and happiness he had been seeking. Victoria, upon hearing of their reconciliation, felt the bitter reality of her defeat. She hadn't just lost Daniel to another woman, but to a family he had chosen to build with sincerity and love. Defeated and humiliated, Victoria left, knowing she would never hold the place in his heart she once thought she owned. Over time, Daniel offered Emily a position in his company, where she could dedicate herself and grow professionally, knowing he would support her at every step. Together, they gradually built a genuine life, where trust and respect were the foundation. For Mia, Daniel became more than just a constant presence. He became the father figure she so desperately needed. In his care for the little one, he found the purpose he had been seeking. One sunny day, while they were playing in the garden, Mia called him Dad for the first time, and Daniel felt it was the greatest title he had ever received. Every day was a step toward a new life, a life where everyone had the chance to be happy, to feel complete and secure. Daniel, Emily, and Mia finally formed the family they all needed, a family where love and hope blossomed anew each morning. And so, surrounded by the joy and warmth of a life full of purpose and love, Daniel, Emily, and Mia went on together, building a future filled with hope, where the past was just a distant memory, and the present a promise they renewed every day. Did you enjoy this heartwarming story full of twists and emotions? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Let us know what you thought of this emotional ending. See you in the next story.